to order. My name is Dale Nelson. I'd like to have the board introduce himself. I represent Pennington County. We'll start with Leroy.
I'm Leroy Olsey. I represent Marshall County.
Lee Cole from Beltrami County.
I'm Gene Tiedemann, I represent West Polk.
Harmel Canot from Red Lake County.
Albert Knapp from East Polk.
Myron Jesme, Red Lake Watershed District Administrator.
Tonight we kind of got inspired for an inspirational meeting with the Pine Lake Kukla, I think they're called. There's some things we felt we could incorporate into a few different things. We're going to turn the meeting over to our engineer. We're going to let him go through everything. Upon his finish, we'll have questions from the audience, and we'd like everybody to make sure they have their cell phones off tonight. Nate, one more thing. I think we should, Myron, would you like to, we're missing Les Torgerson tonight. I think he had a pretty good excuse.
Yeah, Les Torgerson apologizes. He's your representative from Clearwater County. He says it's 50-year college reunion in Bemidji tonight, so he was at our board meeting earlier and regretfully can't participate tonight. This is just a landowner meeting. It's not a hearing. It's to gather input from the local residents of the area. We're going to talk about Pine Lake first, which is a project that was initiated in 1981, or it's completed in 1981 on a petition from Clearwater County Board of Commissioners. And then we'll go on to Four-Legged Lake. That's actually a legal drainage system that was established in the 1920s. And we'll be covering both projects and what the history of them and where we are today, and some of the discussion of what may be in the future. But there's just some discussion. It'll be the first meeting of many, if anything does transpire. So we do really encourage public input at this meeting, so do not be afraid to ask a question. All questions are good. And we will be taping it so that if we don't hear the question very well or forget what it was, at least we can look back and reintroduce the question at a later date. So with that, we'll turn it over to Nate Gallagher from HDR Engineering, and he'll be kind of giving a little synopsis on some other projects that we have worked on in the watershed district, and then we'll segue into Pine Lake. Okay.
Thanks, Myron. This is the microphone system that we have, so does everyone hear me okay? We're doing a fair amount of talking tonight, so I'm going to use this. And I can't stress enough that this is informational. Anything that I present tonight is, no decisions have been made. In fact, the board is here to gain input from the public and to really gauge interest in whether or not there's even a project that either Pine Lake or other adjacent residents and residents of Clearwater County are interested in moving forward with. So please understand, they are here to learn from you tonight, and we're just going to present some history and some other things that the district is doing. In the first about 10 minutes or so, I'm going to kind of give you a lesson. It's not going to be Pine Lake at all. This is all about Red Lake Watershed District, and one of their initiatives right now is detention on a greater scale. The Red River Basin is moving towards retention, and what does that look like? Slowing water down in the landscape before it can harm and flood people, and then metering it out slowly over time. So this first presentation is simply that. It's an educational piece, and then we'll talk about Pine Lake after that. So a lot of you from kind of the eastern part of the Red River Basin may not be familiar with some of the organizations that are centered towards the Red River, but there is out there several organizations, including this watershed district, that are attempting to reduce peak flows on the Red River by 20%. How that translates to the Red Lake Watershed District, where you reside, is that to affect the Red River to a large extent, the Red Lake River has to be reduced about 35% peak at Crookston, as measured at Crookston, and a 13% volume reduction. So if you think about the 1997 flood that everyone kind of talks about as a really big flood in this country, we would have to reduce the entire Red Lake watershed, the peak flow at Crookston, 35% in order to reduce flows in the Red River by 20%. Okay, that red area there, that's the Red Lake watershed in the context of the entire basin. And this is a map of the Red Lake Watershed District, where those green areas are already land areas that are already under some form of retention. And you can see, like this big example here, that's Red Lake. Well, all of that area is under some sort of retention control. Water is slowed down. You've got the Thief and Agassiz refuges up there. That's just to give you an example of, there's a fair amount of this already going on historically by this board. So what did we have in the Red Lake Watershed District for retention prior to this 1997 flood? About 230,000 acre feet. Now, I don't want you to get overwhelmed with numbers tonight, so let's just keep them all as kind of relative. And then, since then, they've actually constructed about 9,000 additional acre feet since 1997, for a total of 240,000 acre feet. That would be 240,000 acres with 1 foot deep of water. That's a lot of square miles of water that's being stored and retained, not including Red Lake. So what did we do for the Red River Watershed Management Board and this district here is, we have gone through for all of North Dakota and Minnesota, and we've looked at, if we were to do more retention in this basin, how would we do it and where would we do it? So we've done an analysis, and when I say we, I mean, like I said, many districts, many consultants, many agencies have mapped out general areas where one could store water to retain it, to reduce downstream flooding on a large scale. Okay, well, for the Red Lake, what that turns out giving you is a map where by color you can determine where are the best areas to store water then to reduce flows on the Red River, and quite frankly, locally as well on the Red Lake River itself. But I know your rivers feed into the Clearwater, which eventually feed into the Red Lake River. But the blue area is kind of in the central part of the Red Lake Watershed District, are the prime areas for retaining water to reduce the peak floods downstream. And the reason that works that way is this red area here is what's called early water. You want that water to get out early before a flood peak, so it's on its way down the system. So you really don't want to mess with that or retain that water. And this late water, the red areas, comes after a flood, so it really already is arriving after those peak floods downstream. So you want to focus your area on the lighter colors, the blues and the yellows, and you can see here that Pine Lake is right here in a blue as a nice area to look at retention. So then the Red Lake Watershed has on file a study that you can get later after the meeting of some of these potential future sites. And just generically speaking, they are areas of potential retention where the land could take it, it's topographically suitable, hydrologically suitable. We haven't got down on the site specifics, but they do have a long-term plan to work towards this goal of flood damage reduction and retention where feasible. Kind of these 4 regions are kind of the major areas left in this district that could successfully store water. Okay, just a few more numbers then, and that is this number here, right here, 18%. That is what could be done by our analysis in reduction at that Crookston point. I remember I said that 35% was the goal at Crookston. Well, with storage on the landscape, we feel you can really only get to 18% reduction, just to kind of give our great-great-great-grandchildren a goal to shoot for. To get to 35%, we probably actually need to do what's called main stem retention on the Red Lake River itself. And right now, that's kind of a permitting impossibility to do main stem on channel dams, but I just want to give you kind of a perspective of how much there is to do. There's so much work to be done to achieve these goals to ultimately reduce flows on the Red by 20%. Last graphic then, this would be a hydrograph at Crookston, just to give you an example of, if this blue line was what's called the 1997 flood, and on the bottom is the date, and on the left is the cubic feet per second. Well, by building all this retention, we could drop it down to here, and by doing that main stem retention, you could basically drop it that much again. That's what we're trying to do, is take peak flows, flooding and volume across the landscape, store it where it's safe, where we can handle it, and then meter it out over time. Okay, so what do these projects look like? I'm going to try this audio. If this doesn't work, I've got plan B.
Since 1998, People in the basin have worked together to build solutions under the mediation process. This process has clear goals for flood damage reduction and natural resource enhancement. After 10 years, this work is bearing fruit. A primary approach in reducing flood damage is to strategically hold water where it falls by creating impoundments.
So I'm just going to run through a few projects. Some of them are in the Red Lake Watershed District and some of them are in other districts, but basically projects are being built. A lot of times they're using embankments and structures then to store water like this, both on ag land and or state land or a combination of both to reduce those flows downstream. This one was up near Roseau. It took about 20 years from beginning to end and it was finally completed in 2013. This project is near Angus, Minnesota. Some of you may or may not know where that is. But again, you can see that embankments were built and all that water was retained and then metered out slowly. There's probably at least a dozen of these kinds of projects up and down Highway 75 that runs like from Crookston to Warren and north and east of that point. Storing water, reducing flood damages.
I'm standing on the west embankment of the Brandt Impoundment located approximately 14 miles north of Crookston, Minnesota. This project was constructed as part of flood damage reduction efforts in the valley to help alleviate flooding downstream.
The watershed approached me about 3 years ago to see if I would be interested in letting them use this piece of property for their impoundment. Downstream flooding that was going on, and we needed to try to alleviate some of that flooding, and this was one of the sites that they had picked to store some water. This spring, this whole area was underwater. We just about maxed out the capacity of the impoundment because it was about within inches maybe of going over the spillway.
This impoundment covers approximately 490 acres and it stores approximately 3,900 acre-feet of water. You visualize the Brandt impoundment as a large bathtub. The water fills up in this bathtub, and you ultimately come down to the outlet structure, which is what you're looking at right now, and you open the gate, just like you would a drain on your bathtub, and you drain it down slowly.
Credit goes to Myra there in a great video. Are you guys able to hear that audio from the video well enough? Okay, great. Another example in the Red Lake watershed where another area of flooding problems was converted into an area that stores floodwater to great success. There's even a board member here that's seen it and worked in his own area. Brandt Impoundment, Myron mentioned this. Again, one after the other, areas that flooded, now the water is stored and safely metered out downstream, managed in a safe manner, and I guess when you get to the main stem channels and the big rivers, we still don't have that control. So that's the goal, is to be able to kind of reduce the flooding on a basin-wide basis. Euclid East, just more pictures. I think I had one more.
I'm standing on the west embankment of the Brandt impoundment.
Who wants to see Myron again? Sorry. So I really did want to just get into the, I can talk all night long about these impoundments, but realistically we're here to talk about Pine Lake. So I would just ask right now, are there any specific questions about the 20% reduction strategy, water retention in general, or what the Red Lake Watershed District is doing right now? And then we'll roll right into Pine Lake if there are no questions. Just trying to whet your appetite, I guess. So I've known for a long time that Pine Lake is a project that the Red Lake Watershed District helps to manage. In the early 1980s, the Clearwater County Board approached the Watershed District about helping them manage the lake better. And this outlet you can see here was constructed, and then on an annual basis, Lauren, who sits over there, does a great job of kind of managing levels to the extent that he can, removing stop logs, adding stop logs, etc. But over time, it's become apparent that there are some concerns with Pine Lake, and that's where a letter came to the district here some months ago from the POPLA organization, Pine Lake Association, about, I'll just paraphrase, but there's issues with, sometimes there's low water, sometimes there's water quality issues, and we all know that sometimes there's high water. There's kind of this feast or famine thing going on with Pine Lake. And so we're here tonight, to present you with some ideas, but also to get your input on whether or not, or what you think should be done or what could be done. One of the interesting things about Pine Lake is there's a substantial drainage area going to the south of the lake. You can see the lake on the north end there, and it has a pretty significant fall and relief from south to the lake. Don't quote me on this, but someone told me tonight it's about 290 feet of fall across this watershed. That is a tremendous drop for the Red River Basin, but really any lake. What that means is that the water rushes off that area and lands in the low point, which is Pine Lake, very quickly. There have been flooding concerns 13 of the last 33 years. That's about 1 out of 3 years. And then, like I said, you have the low water in the summer and the fall, sometimes, some years. You've got the aeration that goes on in the winters. And there just is this opportunity, if you will, to talk about what can we do to make this lake better for everybody. Couple that with the 20% reduction goal, both the local problems and the watershed's other goals. Is this a perfect time to possibly get something done together to solve these problems, or at least improve the situation? Those local benefits would be potentially to provide upstream storage, to reduce the persistent flooding on Pine Lake, manage the lake levels, a little more stable, maybe just like the level you have today would maybe be maintained through the entire season till fall freeze up, and improve the water quality in the lake, both in the lake and as the water then flows downstream. And then potentially also modify the outlet then to assist with those levels in that management goals. Showed you this map earlier. If we were to retain water or do it a little more efficiently, this would be a great place to do it in this region, in that blue central area. So let's talk about what happens on Pine Lake. This is a little graphic. You got to kind of look in 3 dimensions here. This is the existing structure now. Okay, you've got a high flow weir, and then it's notched, so as the lake drops, the capacity to pass water drops, and then you've got these stop log bays that can be lowered, and then ultimately you've got this low flow trickle opening that just kind of lets a little bit go all the time. And right now, the water is at 1283.7 approximately, just above kind of that summer level. Okay, so this graphic, it relates to, if you look along this eastern lake shore, these are some cabins at differing elevations. I'm going to show you some comparisons on the next slides. That's what this lake looks like today. You've got this water at 83.7, and then everybody here on the lake shore, as you move east, is high and dry and doing well, right? Nobody's flooded today, right? It's been a good spring. Excellent. Except maybe your basement's a little wet, I don't know. So right now, when we hit about 1284.4, we start to see some problems. Front lawns are starting to get wet right along in here. There's some folks that start to get nuisance flooding, and it's a pain. Grass that you'd like to mow is now wet and flooded, and so forth. That's what that looks like as it starts to creep up up the slope there, you can see these areas are starting to flood now. I think this is starting to look familiar to some of you. To what we'll call major flooding conditions at 1285, now all of a sudden, the full weir is operating, and these cabins are actually, there's water up to these cabins, and then all these people's front yards are wet. And all of a sudden, all these properties are affected. This is all based on historical data. These are actually documented flooding problems on Pine Lake. And then you can see how the whole lake, look at this image here, starts to get bigger and bigger, just on that little bit of elevation raise. Okay, that's what it looks like in cross section, all the way to the worst flooding you've ever had, which was just about 5 years ago. Just basically swamped everybody. How many of you were here for that? All right. So, you've got septic systems, you've got everything going wrong, you've got erosion. That isn't good for anybody. Certainly not the lake itself. And there again, now we went from, this is where we are today, right down in here, right? Well, it wouldn't take too much to literally jump up there and have another flood. It's happened and it'll happen again. So if you compare all the years, then these red bars are the high years. You can see 85, 96, 97, 02, 09. You can see that it just bounced up. And then you have consistently levels that are in that nuisance or that minor flooding area as well. So when you take a situation like this as an engineer, you got to have a tool. And the tool that we use is called a model. So in order to look at some scenarios, to start talking about solutions, we developed a model then that's what's out here on the right-hand side, which basically equates to this 2009 event, kind of the bigger events. And that way when we look at modifying the outlet or doing upstream storage or anything like that, we can see how the lake will behave. We can simulate what may or may not happen if we try something. So we have that tool now. And what the alternatives we really have right now to deal with on Pine Lake, there's a couple of major categories. One is to modify the outlet, to modify that weir so that it functions differently, possibly put some operable gates on it. And then the second large category of alternative is upstream storage, meaning retaining, that's what I talked about to start with, water, flood water, somewhere upstream in the watershed of Pine Lake. Well, the modification, and again, this is all conceptual, this has not been fully vetted. I mean, if a project to modify the outlet actually proceeded, there would be great detail put into the design of an outlet modification. But conceptually, what I'd like to explain tonight is, right now, water rushes into the lake, and then it passes over this weir that has a fair amount of capacity, but that lets water drop down to 12, like right now it's at 1283.7. Well, what I would suggest is you give yourself the same flexibility to draw it down with gates, but keep the water that you have a little higher, stay at a safe level that everyone agrees upon, but maybe keep some of that water in the lake much, much longer than it does now. So just as an example, if the lake's at 83, am I saying that? It is 83.7, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you would keep it at 84, because it's going to draw down from this point. And then 84 maybe becomes your new operational level, but then you have still a high capacity, so it never gets any higher than the high waters that you've seen, but you just keep more water in the lake. And then if you need to lower it, you just open those gates up. And that way, you've got more water for evaporation, you've got more dilution, you've got, generally speaking, more capacity to sustain those hot summer winds and keep the lake, more water in the lake. It's that simple. And then every time it rains, you fill back up to that higher level. So that's, when you have the outlet discussion, that's kind of the discussion that you have. And recognize that the sliver of elevation that we have to play with on Pine Lake is very limited. We have about 6 inches of capacity to vary at kind of a permanent lake level. before we start getting into flooding problems again. So I'm not advertising this as like a silver bullet. It is simply what we have, because as you know, you go from a tolerable level to a flooding level very quickly on this lake because the properties are so flat adjacent to the lake. Okay, so that's the outlet. The second conversation then is, could water be stored in the upstream watershed of Pine Lake? And the answer is yes. There are several areas, we've identified 3, that could be constructed as retention areas with some form of an embankment and a structure to retain water and then meter it out over time, either to replenish Pine Lake or replenish flows to the river downstream, or simply over time just get it for the water so you can have it for another event in the future. Because one of the things we think about is you can't just keep water forever in a retention area, or that's going to get stagnant and the quality of that water is going to go down. So your operation would be you would store this spring flood water to help the 20% goal, but you wouldn't store that water indefinitely. You would just meter it out over time for 2 purposes. One, to store or to recapture your retention, but also to keep Pine Lake replenished and at a good level for use. The 3 sites that are generically shown here could store a total of 11,000 acre feet. That is a tremendous volume of water. Each site has a different acre feet, but this one is 5,000, this is 37, and this one was 2390. Any one of these sites would compare volume-wise to any of those pictures that I had put up there. Yes, sir.
How many acres is Pine Lake?
Pine Lake is approximately, it looks like a little over, 700, maybe?
700 to 800.
Depending on how high it gets. That's a loaded question, because some, which one? 1,200 acres? Okay, thank you. Now, yeah, that's, if you include Little Pine Lake, that changes. But any one of these, you know, like I said, this is informational. I don't want to dwell so much on the site, other than to say, we've looked up in your watershed. There is the potential to store water in the Pine Lake watershed to this magnitude with, to some extent, minimal effort, because a lot of these sites that are built have 3 sides built of earth and embankment. Well, your watershed is so steep here that you could get away with probably 1 side of an embankment and then using the topography to contain the water. And we also don't imply that these projects are easy to permit, so as we would move forward, that would be one of the major challenges that we would have, is to get a permit for projects like this to store water. But they are built and they are being done, so it's kind of a good time to think about it. Well, what would that actually do if you were actually able to store water then? How would that reflect on Pine Lake? And I'll just give you this sequential example for that 1997 flood, that kind of flood you had in 2009. Well, with all 3 sites, you basically wouldn't have known anything. Those sites would have held all the water that caused the flooding on Pine Lake. So that 11,000 acre feet, if you had those 3 sites built, would have prevented entirely that flood of 2009 on Pine Lake. And then you can see if you did 2 sites, you would have had some nuisance flooding. Just 1 site, quite frankly, you probably would have still had some flooding depending on which site you built. And up here is what you got.
Question for you, Nate.
Yes, sir.
When you're making that assumption in the model, are you assuming that the storage sites were all dry then, at that point, for the water to come in?
Yes, that's a good point, Del Rey, that when you're going to look at the value of flood storage, you kind of have to start with them empty to see how much they would fill up with. So, yeah, in this example, they were empty or nearly empty. And so if you had filled them up, they would greatly reduce or lose their value to you. So that's how you balance your operation. You don't want to keep them full all the time, because they're not necessarily much good to you for flood control. But if an event to fill these up, it took a rainstorm like 2009 to fill these up. So keep that in mind as we're talking about the extreme. You're having floods 1 out of 3 years. This kind of event we're talking about is 1 every 50 year. I mean, it's a very extreme event. So if we're looking at just stopping all this nuisance fluctuation and maintaining levels at a nice level, these retention sites will be just the ticket for that. Okay, then the other example that, and it's just getting into graphs and everything, is you also do that with peak flow. What happened in 2009 was the lake discharged an incredible amount of water downstream, which I'm sure caused flooding downstream that year. And then with each storage site, then you correspondingly reduce the peak flows leaving the lake a large extent as well. So that's the whole 20% reduction. That's the greater good piece. You not only keep the lake level stable, but then you don't send that huge volume and peak of water downstream that currently goes there. So that's the double reason that you would do retention is local benefits and regional benefits. So what are those benefits? For modifying the outlet, realistically, and this is, maybe it's my opinion, and you can have your own ideas, you can have more desirable water levels in the summer and fall if you modify the outlet. There's water quality benefits to keeping more water in the lake for a longer period of time. And then you also have a longer duration of base flows downstream. The upstream storage, then, those benefits are the significant downstream flood damage reduction. That's what FDR stands for. Again, the more desirable levels, the water quality benefits are inherent, and then the base flows downstream are also kind of come with the program. So that's really kind of in a fairly quick fashion what I had for you tonight. And I don't know if I want to open it up to Myron, make some summary comments, or get right into discussion.
I think we get right into discussion.
Okay, Myron, maybe explain some of the cost sharing that goes along with this.
With everything, you guys, I'm sure you sit there, well, what's this gonna cost us? Bottom line, the Red River Watershed Management Board was established back in the 70s through a mediation agreement and adopted through legislation from the state of Minnesota. What the Red River Watershed Management Board does is, like Nate had mentioned, goals are to reduce flooding on the Red River to the north. There's a funding mechanism set up already through an ad valorem tax, and you guys all pay it right now. So it's already, it's something you pay on your land, it's a watershed tax, you see it. It's put in a pool of money. You got them all the way from Canadian border all the way to Wheaton, Minnesota. You got all the tax base of the Red River Valley going in a bundle in a pot of money. There's a pot of money for these types of projects already. These flood damage reduction have very little local cost to them other than what you already seen on your tax rate. There's nothing increased. You're not going to see an increase in taxes for these types of projects. They're already funded. You're going to have people from Wheaton, Minnesota helping to pay for this. Fargo, Moorhead, the whole Red River Valley helps pay for these projects. The watershed district itself has a fund set aside for these types of projects. So, don't get scared of what's it going to do to my taxes next year if we did this type of project, because right now it's not going to change. The funding mechanism is set up already. Believe it or not, it is.
It may be for something like this, but it's not for something like what happened over at the Four-Legged Lake issue, so I should probably wait till then.
That should wait, because the Four-Legged Lake is a legal drainage system, and it has a local public project. That'll be a discussion later on tonight.
Good.
It's a different can of worms. But the same same analogy can be had for Four-Legged Lake.
I guess that's what I feel.
Yep,
I feel
another-
like
yep.
it should be treated the same way as the Pine Lake project is being treated when it.
If it comes to a flood damage reduction component, yes, exactly. We'll talk about that project at 8 o'clock. Yes, sir.
What's the timeframe to get either one of these?
The longest, we can hire the engineer. We have all this information available for modeling. It's really quick to get out to the field work. I would say you always look at maybe a 2-year window on something, because this, relatively so, this landscape is easier to construct. What might be more difficult is the permitting. When you get the Army Corps of Engineers involved, you know, I don't wanna get into that, but permitting gets to be the lengthy process. We can hire an engineering firm and they can go model this area, put up a concept report, cost estimates, and then we actually, you know, there's phases that the Red River Watershed Management Board requires that we go through. Step 1 submittal, 2 submittal, 3 submittal, that's, you know, project. But I would say, realistically, you're looking at a couple of years. Is that safe?
Yeah, it'd also be our hearing process. The
Correct.
watershed has to go by specific statutory hoops. So this is just an informational meeting, just to throw something out there, and if there's interest in it, then it would be a decision for the board, do we want to go forward with this? And they would have to adopt it as a project, and then we'd come back again with the notice, you know, legal hearings, and get everybody's input again with more probably specific plans. So it would have to go through a hearing process, you know, so as it sits here today, there's, you know, nothing that's happening, and it's just a question of whether or not there's some interest in trying to look at something.
Really what the next step would be, so to speak, you know, not necessarily how long it takes to build one of these, but how long it takes to develop the concept before you even consider going to a project formality. What we do on these types of projects, and to help get state funding for it, they set up what they call a mediation agreement. What you do is you set up a project work team, which consists of landowners, agencies, watershed districts, you know, a whole landscape of folks. They all sit down and they kind of brainstorm to try and develop the project, to make sure that all entities, whether it's permitting or not, that they all have a seat at the table to say, well, here's what I see as a problem, here's what I don't see. So you kind of try and hash that out before you get to the project scope, you know, where you're actually developing the project, but you're kind of developing it through the process. So, like I said, like Dory said, this is just a meeting. This is to even see if you guys want to even consider looking at some of these options that are just presented today. Even if we have the project team meeting, in the end, it may fail. Or it may not. But it all depends on, you know, the landowners do hold a lot of the cards here. And it's something that, like I say, we were brought here today to talk about this through a letter about a half a year ago, 3/4 of a year ago, and that's why we're frankly here today. It's a perfect storm. I don't know if you understand, but the federal government has put some federal money into these types of projects now to reduce flooding on the main stem of the Red River. So it's a perfect time to at least look at some of these things. You may not even want to follow through with it, but at least to not even look at it, you may be missing something that could be an opportunity.
Is there anybody here from the
Question?
Okay, look, is there needs downstream from Pine Lake that require continual discharge no matter what lake fountain?
They require continual?
Yes, you have to tap down spillway or something for downstream.
For downstream conditions, what this project could do is to keep a more sustained flow downstream, because you actually are releasing it. You know, when you have a flood, it all just kind of goes haphazardly, out of control, here and gone. Something like this can last, make the stream last longer, be healthier. It would, but you know, anytime it goes downstream in a hurry, then you're causing, you know, adverse effects downstream. But I guess the need would be to probably keep more sustainable level on the channels downstream, more of a continuous flow. So I guess if that's what your question was, kind of.
Well, it seems like if the perfect lake level is here, and then you get a storm event and the lake level is here, well then something happens, and pretty soon by the time the lake stops going down, you're over here. So you're past that perfect level, so the reaction time is
Right.
slow.
Yeah, there's a, you know, in a situation like this, there'd be a coordination among the retention spots upstream versus the opening the gates downstream. You know, so you look at weather forecasts. We use that a lot on any of our operations. If we have we already have you at, let's just say 1184, or 1284. 1284. Let's just assume that that was the level we were sitting at. We know that all of our impoundments or the whole retention areas are dry upstream. We know we can have a substantial rain. You know, so now what we have to do is figure out how much rain we're gonna get, or at least monitor the rainfall, you know, over a 24-hour period. And then if we see or hear that there's gonna be this large rainfall, or there's a weather forecast, we may wanna open the gate, drain it down to 1283.5. You know, in preparation of, now we've started our stream going downstream, water going downstream, at the same time storing and seeing what happens with this event. If we find out it's not as bad as it was, we close this gate, open up the other, and it's a combination. I mean, we have what we call gate tenders on all of our projects, and they have an operating plan as part of the procedure that Del Rey was referring to, the legal hearings and stuff. There's also an operating plan for each of these impoundments. It has to be filed with the state of Minnesota for dam safety. So there's an operating plan on all these that would try and fit all the criteria and some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Kind of a secondary question, the gauge that's in the Sportsman's Lodge at Pine Lake, is that a reliable gauge? Is it checked? Is it verified, anything?
I will let Lauren answer that one, because in fact, I knew this question would come up. Lauren, can you?
Yeah, that was installed in '86, and it is a float type of gauge, and we do check that occasionally off a benchmark. Yep, we wait for the lake to be, you know, as calm as it can be, and then we shoot the lake off the benchmark and check the one in the lodge and make sure they're within, you know, a few hundreds.
So it is calibrated on a frequent basis. Trent, right here.
I had a question for me, two-part question. When the impoundments are full, how much bounce do you have until you have what's called emergency spillway or?
Typically, there's two, if the impoundment is full, typically it's a 2-foot bounce that's allowed.
How many, approximately how many acre feet?
In the bounce area? Well, it would depend entirely on the site and how many acres that site covered. So
And
that's,
then, the second part of the question, after a large event or spring thaw, how much, or how long would you hold the water for increasing lake level? Or would you drop them down halfway and then save the rest for lake level restoring, or?
we actually talked about that at supper tonight. We had the ribs and chicken over here, and I'm hearing an ocean, but that would come out of the project team process, the specific operating. It would also come out of the permitting. Myron talked to this gentleman about operations, and there's gonna be so many organizations that have a say, including landowners, that the bottom line would be, if you use this spring as an example, what you just suggested is probably as good a starting suggestion as anything, is you would have stored the spring runoff, and now you would be releasing some of that water now, as all the water levels are receding downstream, but retaining some for June or July, and then watching the weather. If you're starting to get rain, you can start to release more safely, so that you don't end up with this wetland that's just full of this stagnant water. So it would be a combination of flood control and water quality operation, trying to keep in mind also you want your storage there available for a big rainstorm that may be coming. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a great question. We'd figure that out with people like you at the table.
Question right here. Lauren can probably answer this question. We get asked a lot about that gauge in the lodge, and how does it work? What's under there? Where does it go? Is it groundwater? Or does it go out in the lake? How's it built?
A tube was tiled out to the lake, and then there's a float inside there. Yeah.
So it runs in and out as the lake goes up and down?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking at your slide up there, and God bless the guy in the waiters putting the board, but that is one thing, though. The water quality was so bad last summer, and especially in the fall, and I like having some sand on the beach, but it just keeps expanding and expanding. There's got to be some type of new structure there just to maintain the lake level, because it's nice in the spring, and by the end of the summer, everybody is just screaming and complaining, and it's all directed towards you guys. I hate to say it, but.
Okay, first of all, this water quality usually takes care of itself with replenishment. It's no different than if you have your holding tank out by your house and you have rainfall on it. And pretty soon you haven't had rain for 2 weeks. It's kind of green and there's stuff growing on it. No different than a lake, and there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, you need God to bring more water down to replenish that aquifer, that basin.
What I hear is some people saying, why can't you hold more in the spring? And so that there's more there.
Remember, and you've seen Nate's slide, how little bounce you can handle on that lake. So it's very important with the system that's set up now, you have no buffer for a 2-inch rain upstream of you, because it's just gonna come streaming down into the lake. So you're gonna get, we have to keep it at a summer elevation, unfortunately, because of that event that may happen. We can't predict it's going to happen, but in our operating plan, it's very important that we follow that plan. Because if we don't follow that plan, we get a 2-inch rain and your cabin floods out, then you're gonna be mad at us because we kept it too high. So I mean, it's a no-win situation.
But with a new structure, that, something without boards, with gates, would that help
That's the
control the
question.
level?
Yes, it would. What I presented was if we raise the, kind of the target elevation from 1283.5 to 1284, you gain that 6 inches. And if the lake is 1,200 acres, that's 600 acre feet of additional water, additional retention. Yes, that modification would give you more water longer into the season.
You also have your retention ponds upstream continuously flow in as it's evaporating, so you hold that easier.
That's what I was gonna say. You can't raise the level with just the structure and expect to maintain it, could you? Don't you need your
Well, you're adding, but you have 600 acre feet to evaporate. It's more than, it's like you said, holding more in the spring. It's
So I
it's
guess
a Band-Aid to the retention. The retention option is kind of the Cadillac. Modifying the structure is a first step. It's an option.
Any idea how much evaporation and acre feet we have there in summer?
Oh, it's over 2 feet on a typical lake.
Myron? It's unfortunate that it did get low last fall, but it was the 3rd year in a row relatively dry. There was no rain all last summer, and with the evaporation, I mean, that's what happens, unfortunately.
I heard a hydrological, you guys all know how big the upper and lower Red Lakes is. In a normal year, more evaporates into the air than goes through that structure at the outlet in Red Lake. So just visualize that. If you've ever seen that structure, it looks daunting, but more evaporates than it does, than goes through there. So just the energy, just to show you what evaporation can do, especially to a small lake like Pine Lake.
Would any design change in any of this have a little room to grow? Say as time goes on and maybe some of the cabins that maybe are flooding, maybe rebuild or remodel, and according to code, they have to go up 3 feet above normal high water. So everything's kind of getting built up. Would a design that's happening now allow for some future elevation change without coming back 10, 20 years from now and having to do this again?
Well, I think you could build a structure. He's talking about, I see what you're saying, is in maybe 10 years, you can tolerate 1284.5, because all the cabins, all the primary flooding has been solved. If you work that into your design, yeah, you could basically set the stage for a raise in that rear elevation with your design.
What you would do, every year, or anytime something changes, you can go back and have a hearing to change your operating plan. That's what it would take, right, Del? It would take another legal process once the operating plan is set.
Right, because once you adopt an operating plan, or if the board did, then it's subject to appeal by anybody who wants to appeal it. If nobody appeals it, then that's your operating plan. And if you want to change it, you have to go again through a hearing process so that everybody has their say in it, and they would have the chance to appeal that again if there was going to be a modification to it.
So yeah, short answer is if everyone decides to, I'm tired of being flooded out, I'm gonna move higher ground, or if there's an opportunity to, and you've taken everyone out of that floodplain, yeah, you can change your operating plan.
But would the actual hard portion of this, the structure, the retention area, whatever, will that allow for any elevation change.
Well, you'd have to modify the structure slightly.
I'll use a simple example. Let's say you built a structure out of concrete instead of a sheet pile weir, it's an actual board cast in place structure. Well, you could just form that up at raise 6 inches.
We did that on a large one, or
Yeah.
actually turned it down.
But that, as an example, I'm not saying you're gonna do concrete, but yeah, there's a way.
Have you had any prior to, upstream, wasn't there some dams in place quite a few years ago, and maybe it was around 97, that were washed out and never replaced?
Little Pine Lake WMA, was there a structure there?
Lauren?
Ronnie talks about a DNR dam, I think. Is that
U.S. Fish and Wildlife?
No, it's a DNR structure.
Are you gonna have any problems with, DNR as far as that wildlife management area? Of being able to fluctuate that a lot?
Well, I'll start out. I think that's at an elevation much higher than Spring Lake, but I'm not totally sure which site you're talking about.
That would all be addressed in the project team, because DNR would be sitting at that table, and they've been supporters of a lot of these types of projects. So, I mean, that's a good point, a good discussion, but that will be definitely something they bring to the table in the project team format, if we were to proceed with that. Trust me, they'll look after their interests, you're gonna have the Corps looking after their interests, you're gonna have MPCA here. I mean, but this isn't new. I mean, this is, every project that we've built has had the same partners or the same players there. So it's not anything new to them agencies. And they have been, I mean, we've never not built a project that the public wanted to build. It may have been a pain in the, to get permitting, but they've been built that the public has wanted them. How many agencies? Holy cow, you want me to name them?
More than two.
Oh, yeah, well, I could just go, actually, DNR is gonna be involved, MPCA, US Army Corps of Engineers, US Fish and Wildlife Service, Minnesota Environmental Advocacy, you're gonna have your local SWCDs, your NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. I'm using a lot of acronyms, and I'm used to that, I'm sure. The Audubon Society will have someone sitting, which, they love birds, and they like storing, they have no problem storing water, they actually like that. So it's anything that gets habitat, and there's a lot of habitat up there now. I mean, we've taken a tour in the upper reaches of this Pine Lake. There's a lot of habitat up there right now, so I mean, it's, it will all be looked at, but again, we do want landowners on this project team, because they're the ones that are gonna bring the local flavor on this, so there will be, the board will, if this meeting goes into a project team format, the board will look at some key landowners to incorporate into this, so you have your local, say, your county commissioners are going to be involved, whether they like it or not. They are going to be involved, they're asked to be at the table, your county engineers are gonna be asked to be at the table. The Red Lake, I don't know if they have any, I don't think the Red Lake Band has anything here, but they have on other projects, but, so.
What's your process of getting the opinion of all the property owners to say yes, or how do you go about that? In order to step forward and start going.
Well, I think this is a good format right here, and what we want to get out of this right now, I think now is let you guys take this home, think about it. We have a website, it's redlakewatershed.org. You can go on there and look at some of our projects that we've already completed. You can call our office with any suggestions, inputs, we'll relay them back to the board. I think, right now I think it's to absorb it a little bit, but, and then just kind of give us some feedback at the end of the day, whether it's a month or a week or 2 weeks or whatever. But I think that's really, the board is going to get a feeling from the calls we receive, yay or nay. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we're gonna
I'm getting a feel for it now, because I just watch it and I see a lot of heads going like this, and I haven't seen any of them going like this.
I'd just like to make a statement to everybody in the room that if you're concerned about how it's gonna look, get involved, stay involved. Because the agencies are gonna get involved, and they're gonna stay involved, and they're gonna leave. When the project is done, they're gonna leave, and you're gonna live with it, so.
That's a very good point. In the end, you're gonna be here.
Let's say that one of your potential impoundments is 3 or 6 landowners. All right, 5 of them say it's a good idea, one guy said absolutely not. Then what do you do?
Well, then we kind of let the public pressure take care of itself, or there is mechanisms in place, but let me just state that right now, most of the, if we're gonna store water, let's just assume in the spring, you're gonna have a different elevation than you would in the summer on some of these storage things. Because in the spring, it may creep up on some, cropland that's lower level. I don't really wanna say what's gonna happen, because I hate talking about something that may happen. I always look positive and, we can get through any barrier, hopefully. But landowners that are going to be seeing water on their property for a longer time than they see normally will be compensated through what we call a flowage easement. So once we, once we decide, if we decide that we're gonna do a project upstream, we will get a hold of these landowners, all these key landowners. We'll sit down and just have meetings with them. Nobody's gonna be in that room except for landowners and maybe me and some board members. And I mean, that's what it's gonna be discussion amongst them. Once we get an elevation from the model, we'll even go out and show you where the water's going to be. That's the highest it can be. This is what we're gonna purchase a flowage easement for. And if it isn't, if it gets higher, we gotta release the water out of it. So I mean, that's the elevation. Once we get that easement, Delray, isn't that correct? Once we get that easement, that's the fixed elevation.
Right, and that's assuming it's voluntary. If it, was 5 to 1 and the one person was adamant that they didn't want to do it, then I think it would become a board decision. Okay, are we going with that? Or, do you take a look at the greater good? You would always have the availability for eminent domain. I think we've only done that once since I've been here in 20 years. But what we strive to do is do a voluntary flowage easement, and it defines the area and you're paid for it, but then you still own the land. So if for some reason this project goes away, it's not like the watershed owns this pocket of land. It's still owned by that person.
We really encourage local ownership at the end of the day. When this is all done, it's still in that same landowner's, name.
And I haven't been over, overall every square inch of this sub-watershed, but more than likely, these retention areas will be where it's already wet. It'll just be deeper and longer, so we're not really talking about flooding ag land, but maybe pasture, some of these instances, but it's gonna be a similar land use, just a different regime of water, deeper and longer type of thing.
I'm guessing this will probably be done in phases. We start with the
That would all come out in the process of the project, I guess. It'll depend on, if you're looking at, I would assume that the outlet structure would be the first thing. If you know something's gonna happen upstream, or even, I would think the structure would be the first thing you look at, the outlet structure. You have to have your, that in order before you can do much upstream, so I would have to say, yeah, it would be done in phases though. Even if you were gonna do the whole project, you're gonna have to do it in phases. And the engineers would have to really sit down and figure out what's the best phase so that something isn't disrupted. Normal life isn't disrupted while it's being constructed.
Once you flood a retention area, that does not become public water, does it?
All waters in the state is water, even, but, Dave might want to answer that.
Well, it won't change jurisdiction, but you'll need a permit from somebody to do the project in the first place.
No, I meant as far as, people that want to go in there hunting and fishing, that's all over the public.
No, with the flowage easement, you would still be the owner of that, just subject to the right of the watershed to flooding.
Good.
So you can still put up no trespassing signs if you want. If the watershed purchases the land, then that's kind of been a board decision whether they want to allow public access, or if they feel that for safety reasons it's better not to.
And Delroy makes a good point. There are projects that we've had where landowners say, you know, I'm for the project, but I don't want to own the land anymore. You know, just, I'd rather just you buy it from me and do the project. We've had a few occasions, but I've been here 11 years. We've built 2 impoundment sites. We've only purchased 11 acres on one, and that was the guy from Morfino, Idaho, that we hadn't seen that property in 30 years. And, so we ended up buying that land. And then we bought another quarter from 3 retired guys, brothers that didn't want it anymore. All the rest is still in private ownership.
I can just see that problem, that question coming up.
Well, that's a huge thing. I mean,
Dates
you
and all that.
don't want to lose.
Let's go duck hunting there, you know?
No,
We wouldn't want.
no, you're still your private land.
Yeah, there's a difference between having an easement like for a bike path, you know, where it's open for the public, and that's the whole reason for the easement, is to allow people to travel. Here, the whole reason for the easement would just be for flowage and storage of water. So it should not change the character of the land.
Well, how will you be protected by other environmental agencies? Like, take my lot, for instance, I had 186 feet when I bought it. And down through erosion, I got 169. And every time I need a permit to do anything, you know, I'd be so far from the natural shoreline or high water mark or whatever it is. I mean, if the lake raises and takes away by erosion, I'm not against the project, don't get me wrong, I know we need more water. Right, but you mentioned, you don't lose, you retain ownership of your land. Do I own 20 feet into the water then?
I don't know the meandering, I don't know the laws of the state as far as that.
Well, on the lake, yeah, the water is public on the lake
Right,
itself.
then it just goes in my front door.
Yeah, the water washed away the yard, so now you're saying people can swim to the front yard because they own water.
We aren't saying anything. It's the laws of the state. If there's a, let's just use the example, if there's a lake, and I just talked to one of my DNR guys on this, because there was a reference to Red Lake. If you own the land, they can use the water, if they're in their boat already, and they can come right in front of your house and fish. They can't get out of their boat and walk across your land to get to the neighbor's land unless they're using it for recreational. So you'll have to, if the water is this deep, you have to pretend you're swimming. You know,
I'm not
so-
worried about, that's what I'm not worried about, the guy that says my sewer system is obsolete, and I gotta replace it 100 and some feet from the shoreline. Shoreline all of a sudden is 20 feet less than I started over.
That shoreline zoning ordinance, which Clearwater County probably has, so I don't know anything about that. That's a whole different can of worms.
You know, I've had property in Pine Lake since '73, and I have a 48-foot dock and a 16.5-foot crestliner boat, and I couldn't get to the end of my dock several times. But I've also driven that boat within 20 feet of my cabin.
The points he was making,
And,
it's a flashy lake.
but it needs to be stabilized. I don't know of anybody on Pine Lake that would disagree with that.
My pontoon was on the sand last fall. Pushing it into the waters, take it out of the lake. It should be.
Well, you guys are talking Pine Lake, I have a place on Red Lake. We couldn't get within 400 yards of the shore last year. We had 5 sandbars that our pontoon had to sit 300 yards away. You know, so we couldn't even use the shore anymore. We had to go to West Wind and dock out of West Wind all the time. So I feel your pain. I'm talking about a bigger lake than you have. So last year was a dry year.
Go ahead, Trent, but I just wanted to, just bring up that, you know, if there's anybody who wants to speak against this, or, you know, thinks that what's being considered isn't a good idea, this is a time for that also, because the board's here, and they're gonna take all of this into consideration, you know, if they're requested to make a decision in the future. So I just wanna make sure that if somebody has feelings, you know, strongly against it, that this would be the forum for that also.
It'd be hateful to go through this process and go to a hearing and then we find out that there's a lot of opposition. So this is the, don't feel bad. I mean, really, this is your forum.
I don't think I was against it.
No.
I was funny, you didn't have
I was just gonna make a point as far as, you know, 25 2,500 acre feet would give you the 200, or the 2-foot elevation rise for the evaporation. So percentage-wise, you wouldn't have very much of the impoundments utilized for that value.
Each side, I think, you're talking about the one site would take care
Well,
of
if
that.
it's 1,200 acres to the lake, you want to raise it 2 feet, 2,500 acre feet should do it.
Right, just for, but you also have to plan on some precipitation to help.
Oh, I understand
help
that,
you
but I
out.
mean, that would be, you'd basically draw it down to 2,500, 8,000 acre feet, I would think. So that you can have that for replenish the lake during the summer.
Right, yeah, I mean, the numbers are
There isn't
there.
gonna be very much in the impoundments in a normal summer.
Right, because you'll just be feeding it, right.
Well, we hope that's the case, 'cause I mean, from a water quality standpoint, they did touch on that. We don't want that water sitting up in that landscape for a long period of time and get musty and slimy, and now you're bringing it into the lake. That's not productive at all. There would be mechanisms, I think, that, even, getting into the project part of it, where there may be some, the DNR may want some rock riffles put upstream to agitate the water before it gets to the lake, to get more oxygen. So there might, there could be a whole host of components to this project that would be incorporated to assure that we're not bringing that slimy, musty water down into the lake, and that'd be counterproductive. That's not what we would want to do either, so.
And then the other thing I had, I guess on the project, that we cut the spawning off for the suckers and the northerns, and are any of these areas in there?
That would be a fishery
You guys
question.
would know where to fish.
Yeah, that would be a fishery, and they will be involved too, so they will have a better history of the upland areas for that question.
Myron, I think you touched on the one thing, the key component is timing here. With the flood damage reduction money available, the timing is crucial here. Normally this project probably couldn't afford to be,
Dale's exactly right. The watershed district is sitting on, and I'll be honest, you can look at our financial report. We're looking for these types of projects. This is the types of projects that we have money in the bank through that Red River Watershed Management Board appropriation. I mean, it's sitting there for these types of projects. Pardon me?
Quit looking. Can you start on Monday?
Right here.
Are there any of the landowners potentially going to be affected by this, or any of them in the room? I wonder how they.
That would be a good question. Does anyone live upstream of Pine Lake that's here today? Anyone upstream? We have one back here. Not very, well, you don't have to be very far.
I'm right on Little Pine.
Okay. Do we have any of the, 2 miles away, 3 miles away? That's the group. It's a good question, Kelly. Okay, I don't know any of them. I don't know a lot of people, but that's a good question, because that's the ones who are gonna be, you're one of them? Okay. How far upstream about?
On the south side of the, Little Pine watershed.
Okay. So you'd be in what that site, yeah, okay. And you have how many acres in that area? Okay.
There was a question back there.
So you're on number 3, the area number 3? Okay. Pam?
Yes, I'm sure there'll be a property owners of Pine Lake meeting coming up very shortly. What's the best email address, or you gave us a website, but, I'm sure you'll get a lot of positive feedback on this.
Okay.
But is it best to go to just one of you guys, or?
I think the best is use our Red Lake Watershed District email address, Tammy.
It's RL Waters, all one word.
RL Waters.
At wicktel.com.
At Wicktel, and that's WIKTEL.com.
And just put regarding Pine Lake.
Exactly, and Tammy will get them.
Because the property owners have the website, so hopefully we'll get something out on that, and you guys should be able to get some good feedback.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Oh, there you go. Red Lake Watershed.org.
I think we have enough pens over there too, Myron, if you want to grab.
Oh yeah, please, take some pens with you when you walk up. We just bought a bunch of them. It's for these types of things.
Either before you leave tonight or after you think about this, please indicate your willingness, if this does proceed, to be on the project team as a landowner. Because you know, we're always short of landowners, and that's the most critical component to getting projects like these completed. And then I would add, the question came up about people that are directly affected, like you, sir, or possibly you or others. They would be brought in very early. We wouldn't just spring something like this on directly affected landowners. They would be really coordinated with.
We're gonna go a step further. It was difficult for us to get this together because, you know, the Pine Lake has a benefited area through the project that manages it, you know, for our management. But the people that live upstream aren't in that benefited area. So we couldn't, the only people that got any notice are the ones that we had from the benefited area. So like guys like you and your neighbors that live upstream, I would, you know, we're gonna go a little step further. We'll go on, you know, the website, Clearwater County website, look at landowners, and we may try and just get a landowner meeting with you folks upstream and kind of explain, you know, what we're looking at, and maybe a little more zoomed up area of where Nate is looking, and kind of see what the landscape looks like up there for you know, temporary storage. So you would like.
Did we do publish notice to the meeting?
Yeah, we did publish notice for 3 weeks.
Yep.
3 weeks in the newspaper, so.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I didn't know that was you. Any other questions? Are we sitting good for time yet?
We've got 20 minutes if we need.
Okay.
Yeah, Myron, I was wanting to tell you good morning, and thanks for, you know, addressing this deal. There's been a lot of talk about it.
Well, that's what we're here for. I mean, we usually try and go where we see problems or we're told about problems, and a lot of times it's in our 10-year overall plans. We'll look at stuff like that, but we never really had that in our 10-year overall plan. You know, Pine Lake's always been an issue as far as, you know, the flashiness. Lauren's been around a long time. I won't even say how many years. 34. So he's seen it since right when it was started. So, but we've never really been asked to, you know, come up, and the timing, like Dale said, timing is perfect. I mean, the money's here, and I can't stress that enough because it hasn't been here for years. You know, we had to go to, I mean, I've only been here 11 years, and just when I started, I'd go to the state and beg for money, and do this before you can get anything accomplished. And we have the money. So.
Can I ask for a show of hands who has property around Pine Lake and who's here for the next presentation?
Okay, who's here from Pine Lake eating alone? Holy.
Lots.
You got a good representation here. I hope Four-Legged Lake is just as good.
Looks small.
And I changed the subject just a little bit, but I'm not really changing it. I'm involved with the Gothic line, and we have concerns with Pine Lake in that we finance the aeration systems that go on there. We work with the sportsman's club, and together we've been maintaining that aeration system for 20-some years. We used to struggle with farm tractors and rice pumps and field ramps, and lucky nobody fell in the lake. But for the last 18 years, we've maintained two 15-horsepower pumps on Pine Lake that are turned on when the DNR says to turn them on. And I truly believe they have made a difference on the quality of the lake and especially the fish in the lake. And they've been financed mainly by our fundraising efforts at Sportsman's Lodge, where a lot of these cabin owners help us by pull tabs.
Okay, so keep pulling tabs, is that what you want to say?
You're talking about all this money you got.
Okay, I'm gonna, okay, let you finish with our.
That's just what we're doing. I was approached by one of the little oil pipeline companies that go through here, and they have some environmental grant money available. And they approached the Sportsman's Club, the Sportsman's Club approached us, and we're working on now updating our little system, replacing motors and pumps that have been in for 18 years. They're on regular current, not three-phase. They cost $1,000, $1,500 a month, so the Lions Club is spending $3,000 a year, $5,000 a year, $8,000 a year, depending on, and that's big money for us.
I would think so.
And now we're talking with Clearwater Folk Electric about the possibility of getting three-phase in and replacing those pumps. And with Enbridge, there's a possibility of financing that along with what the Lions Club can contribute. So that's just a point of interest, making everybody get it.
That sounds like a real concerted effort on your part. To find out about
Okay. Maybe you can just touch base, when we talk about like the federal funds and stuff like that, I don't know if they'd be available just for a modification of the weir. Because when you're talking about, taking monies from the larger areas because of flood retention benefits, something where we can say that, hey, this could have effect on main stem flooding for the Red River of the North. And so if they're able to hold back some water, then I think there's access to those funds. But if it was just for a weir, and the only purpose of the weir is just, to try to control the fluctuations on Pine Lake, then they might not be available. So
No, I think
it just depends on.
it's better to say they won't be available.
Right.
The federal money will not be available for that period, the way they're looking at the rules right now. The federal part of the flood damage reduction component is running through the landowners. So what the federal money could be used for is to put it into programs that may be friendly to the farm groups and that the landowner has to apply for. I mean, right now, they haven't made that money, they're still writing the rules, but that money wouldn't be available for structures.
Right. And while it sounds good and stuff, it's not like everyone's got a pot of money just to help Pine Lake. It would be, essentially for the greater good of a lot of other people because of the control and the retention of the water and the downstream. So it just would have a lot bigger impact.
Well, that's a good point, Dory. The money that we're talking about isn't just to make your lake better, and we can't sell it that way. We have to definitely do it for flood damage reduction. That's why we're sitting here giving you this, telling you this project, because we have to look at, under statute, our money that we have can only be used for certain things. And it's not to make sure your lake is better, so to speak, but it can be for flood damage reduction, for the 20% reduction to the Red River of the North.
I think the project would go hand in hand.
Yep.
There's no question.
Oh, it's a win-win, because it's definitely, I can see it being a win-win. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll clear out this room. Albert?
Why don't you mention that last order, if they want some concerns, he'd be willing to answer?
Yes, Les would be available. If you guys know Les, talk to him. Give your point of interest to Les. He can bring it back to the board meeting. But otherwise, contact us through the resources that we gave you here. But yeah, Les is your representative, so get his ear.
We have a upcoming meeting for Pukla on Memorial Weekend. Would something like a petition signed by the cabin owners that come to our meeting, would that help you at all, or isn't it?
We already have a letter of support from your board. And that's why the board is here today, from that letter.
So you need nothing else?
I think not. What do you guys think at this point?
No, I think we're seeing fine. I mean, I've been on the watershed 17 years. I spent many years with Vernon Johnson here. And Kelly Norman, he was on the board with us for 3 years. In my 17 years, I've never seen this kind of participation towards any project. I think we're gonna go back as a board full-heartedly and try to kick this in gear, without a doubt. So I think that.
Well, my opinion, my compliments to the board, you guys came here with a real plan. It looks good.
Thank you. And there's gonna be more contact here. We'll be, as we proceed, we'll be giving you updates. So I hope you left your names. And I'm not gonna say I'm gonna email all you guys, because that's not gonna happen. But we will keep through the social media. All right? Thank you very much for coming.